Best or nothing, that's Mercedes' actual motto. Not one of the companies, the company. But best or nothing companies don't lose half their profit in a year. Mercedes just did. They don't watch their biggest market collapse in a single quarter. Mercedes just did that too. So which one's real? The gold standard or the company quietly falling apart behind it? Stick around. It's not one disaster, it's 5. The empire built on best or nothing. To understand how far Mercedes has fallen, you first have to understand how impossibly high they built the tower. Mercedes-Benz isn't just an old car company, it's the original car company. Carl Benz patented the Benz patent motor wagon in 1886, and that single three-wheeled contraption is considered by most historians the birth certificate of the automobile industry. While other brands spent decades trying to earn their reputation, Mercedes was born with one already built in. For the next century, that head start turned into an obsession with engineering perfection that no other manufacturer could quite match. The S-Class Mercedes flagship sedan became the default reference point for the entire luxury segment. When BMW engineers wanted to know what premium actually meant, they bought an S-Class and took it apart. When Lexus launched in America in 1989 trying to challenge German luxury, the car they benchmarked against wasn't a BMW. It was a Mercedes. The brand built an entire mythology around the phrase, best or nothing. It wasn't just a slogan, it was baked into the company's identity. Mercedes invented the crumple zone, the concept that saved more lives in car accidents than almost any single innovation in automotive history. They invented the anti-lock braking system as we know it today. They pioneered airbags, electronic stability control, and a dozen other safety technologies the entire industry eventually copied because Mercedes engineers didn't wait for regulators to force their hand. They built the safest cars first and let the rest of the industry catch up. By the 2000s, Mercedes was riding as high as any luxury automaker in history. It was, for years, the best-selling luxury car brand on the planet, trading the crown back and forth with BMW and Audi, but almost never falling far behind. It had a stranglehold on China's exploding wealthy class, a country where owning an S-Class wasn't just about transportation. It was a status symbol on wheels, proof you'd made it. Executives, business owners, government officials, the emerging Chinese elite bought Mercedes the way earlier generations of American executives bought Cadillacs. At its peak, nearly a third of every Mercedes sold globally went to Chinese customers. Think about that for a second. A German engineering company built in the 1800s had become dependent on the buying habits of a rising Asian middle class a century and a half later. And for a while, that dependency looked like genius. China was the engine, Mercedes was the machine. Profits were enormous. The stock performed. The brand felt untouchable. But here's the thing about building your entire empire on top of one market, one strategy, one bet on the future. When that bet stops paying off, there's nowhere left to hide. And starting in 2024, Mercedes' bet started collapsing in ways almost nobody inside the company saw coming fast enough to stop. The profit free fall. Let's start with the number that should stop you in your tracks. In full year 2025, Mercedes-Benz's operating profit collapsed by 57%. Not 5%, not 15%, 57%. Operating profit fell to 5.8 billion euros, well below what analysts had even braced for. Net profit, the actual bottom line number that tells you what a company really made after everything, almost halved, dropping to roughly 5.3 billion euros, down from 10.4 billion the year before. Automotive sales overall declined more than 9%, and the company took a direct hit of over €1 billion just from new U.S. tariffs alone. If that sounds bad, 2026 didn't offer much relief. In the first quarter, earnings before interest and taxes fell another 17% to 1.9 billion euros. Net profit dropped 17.2%. Revenue slipped nearly 5%. By the second quarter, the picture got even uglier in the region that mattered most. Mercedes's automotive division, the actual car-making business, the reason the company exists, was described by its own executives as the weak link in an otherwise mixed quarter, dragged down by competitive pressure, a less favorable mix of models, and the enormous cost of trying to launch an entirely new generation of vehicles all at once. Here's the number that really tells the story, though. Mercedes-Benz cars sold 417,765 vehicles in the second quarter of 2026. That's down from 453,674 units in the same quarter just 1 year earlier. That's not a rounding error. That's tens of thousands of fewer luxury cars finding buyers in just 12 months. Now, to be fair to Mercedes, this isn't happening in a vacuum. Every legacy German automaker is bleeding right now. BMW's own CEO warned that its automotive division's profit margin could fall as low as 1% this year. That's practically break-even for a company that used to run margins luxury brands are supposed to run. So this isn't just a Mercedes is uniquely broken story. It's an entire century-old business model getting tested at the same moment by the same forces, and Mercedes is taking arguably the hardest hit of all of them. But understanding why requires understanding what's actually happening 7,000 miles away in the one market Mercedes built its entire modern strategy around: the China meltdown. Remember that number I mentioned earlier? Nearly a third of every Mercedes sold globally used to go to China. That dependency is now the single biggest problem the company has. Let's walk through exactly how bad it's gotten. In 2024, Mercedes's China deliveries fell to 714,000 vehicles, down 6.7% from the year before. Painful, but manageable. Then in 2025, deliveries plunged to 575,000 units, a 19.3% collapse, marking a 5-year low for the brand in its most important single market. And 2026 didn't slow the bleeding down. It accelerated it. First quarter deliveries in China dropped another 27% year over year. Second quarter deliveries fell 30%, not 30% below some inflated pandemic-era peak. 30% year over year right now in a market that used to be Mercedes's single most reliable profit engine. So what happened? The short answer is BYD and NIO, and a dozen other homegrown Chinese brands that didn't even exist as serious competitors a decade ago. These companies didn't just build cheap EVs and stay in their lane. They moved directly into the premium segment Mercedes had owned for generations, offering vehicles loaded with technology, built with genuine engineering quality, priced dramatically below what a comparable Mercedes costs, wrapped in software and infotainment experiences that, frankly, out-innovate what German automakers have been shipping. A wealthy Chinese buyer in 2026 doesn't automatically reach for the three-pointed star anymore. They cross-shop it against a homegrown alternative that might actually have better in-car tech, and that comparison is one Mercedes is increasingly losing. Layer on top of that a genuine economic headwind. China's prolonged real estate crisis has quietly hollowed out the wealth of exactly the consumer class that used to buy S-classes without blinking. German luxury brands, Mercedes, Porsche, Audi, are disproportionately exposed to that wealth destruction because their entire customer base skews toward exactly the property-owning elite that got hit hardest. The internal response inside Mercedes has been brutal. In February 2025, the company launched its first wave of layoffs in China. Severance packages were relatively generous at first, essentially 9 months' pay plus bonuses for signing quickly. By 2026, as the pressure intensified, Mercedes cut that severance package down significantly, offering roughly 6 months instead of 11, a clear signal of just how much financial discipline the company is now enforcing internally. Reports indicate Mercedes is planning to cut over 30% of its China staff in the latest round alone. Think about that. Nearly a third of the workforce in what used to be the company's crown jewel market, gone. Now, here's where this story gets genuinely uncomfortable, because China isn't Mercedes' only self-inflicted wound. The company also made a massive strategic bet on where the entire automotive industry was heading, and that bet blew up in their face too. The electric vehicle whiplash. A few years ago, Mercedes made a bold public declaration. The company announced an electric-only strategy, essentially telling the world it would go all in on battery electric vehicles, betting the future of the brand on a rapid, aggressive transition away from combustion engines entirely. It was a confident, headline-grabbing move, the kind of statement that plays great at investor conferences and auto shows. Then reality showed up. Mercedes' EV sales collapsed 25% in 2024. Not grew slower than expected. Collapsed. The demand simply wasn't materializing the way the company had bet it would, especially not at the price points and margins Mercedes needed to hit. Consumers, it turned out, weren't ready to abandon combustion engines nearly as fast as automakers had assumed, especially in the premium segment where buyers are often more conservative, more brand loyal, and more sensitive to range anxiety and charging infrastructure than the EV evangelists predicted. So Mercedes did something that looked, from the outside, like a full reversal. The company quietly walked back its electric-only ambition and shifted to what it now calls electric first, a far softer, more hedged position that acknowledges gas and hybrid vehicles are going to stick around much longer than originally planned. The company announced it would launch 19 new combustion engine models alongside 19 new battery electric models by the end of 2027. Read that again. 19 and 19. That's not a company racing toward an electric future anymore. That's a company hedging its bets so hard, it's essentially building two entirely separate product lineups at the same time. Here's why that whiplash is so expensive. Developing a single new vehicle platform costs billions of dollars and years of engineering work. Developing two parallel platforms, one gas, one electric, while also trying to cut costs and rebuild profit margins, is about as difficult and expensive a position as a car company can put itself in. Mercedes essentially spent years and untold billions building toward an electric-only future, then had to reroute significant resources back toward combustion engines when demand didn't cooperate. That kind of strategic zigzag doesn't just cost money. It costs time, focus, and the kind of internal clarity a company needs when trying to fight off well-funded, focused competitors on every front. To be clear, it isn't a total collapse. Mercedes did report that battery electric sales rose 22% quarter-over-quarter in late 2025, driven largely by the launch of the new electric CLA in Europe, and second quarter 2026 fully electric deliveries actually jumped 50% globally compared to the year before. So there are genuine bright spots. But bright spots inside an otherwise shrinking, less profitable automotive division don't change the bigger picture. Mercedes bet big on one direction, got burned, and is now trying to rebuild credibility on two fronts simultaneously, with less cash and less patience from investors than it had when this all started. And if you think strategic whiplash and a collapsing home market were the worst of it, you haven't seen what's been happening on the actual assembly line. When the cars started failing. Here's where best or nothing starts to sound less like a promise and more like a punchline. In July 2026, Mercedes issued a recall covering 310,667 vehicles in the United States for corroding door lock microswitches. Here's what that actually means in plain English. Moisture was getting into the switch housing under certain climate conditions, sustained humidity, elevated temperature, condensation, and that corrosion could interfere with comfort functions like power windows and locks. In the worst-case scenario, Mercedes couldn't rule out a risk connected to vehicles rolling away unintended. This wasn't some obscure niche model either. It hit a huge swath of the lineup. and the investigation had actually been quietly ongoing since 2021, with scattered reports of radios and lights staying on after drivers exited their vehicles. It took until a report from outside the U.S. in May of 2025 for engineers to connect the dots and realize this wasn't just an annoying glitch. It was a genuine safety issue. Then, just 2 months earlier, in May 2026, Mercedes recalled another 144,049 vehicles, this time for something even more unsettling if you're actually behind the wheel. A software defect in the infotainment control unit could trigger an unexpected reset while the car was in motion, causing the entire digital instrument panel, your speedometer, your warning lights, everything you rely on to drive safely, to just go blank. Mid-drive, no warning. The recall covered a genuinely staggering range of Mercedes' current lineup: the AMG GT, the C-Class, the E-Class, the SL, the CLE, the GLC, even the Mercedes-Maybach SL680, the brand's ultra-luxury flagship. 61 distinct model configurations, all carrying the same underlying flaw. Owner complaints paint an even more human picture of what this actually felt like on the ground. One owner described buying a brand new GLC 300 and watching the screen die twice within weeks of ownership. Another described driving an E-Class with no instrument panel and calling it, quote, very scary. Reports of a lemon 2026 AMG 53. Customers waiting more than 6 months for a software fix on unrelated seat issues, describing customer service as, in their words, non-responsive. These aren't anonymous statistics. These are people who paid $70,000, $80,000, $90,000, sometimes more, for a car that's supposed to represent the absolute pinnacle of German engineering, and instead they got a blank dashboard at highway speed. And these 2 recalls weren't isolated incidents in an otherwise clean year. Earlier recalls hit the G-Class over incorrectly installed wheel bolts that could let a wheel loosen or detach entirely while driving. Another covered radar sensor circuit boards on the AMG G63 and the electric G580 that didn't meet current production specifications. Individually, recalls happen to every automaker. It's a normal part of the business. But when you stack them up, corroding switches, blank instrument panels, loose wheels, faulty radar sensors, all within the same 18-month window, on a brand whose entire 140-year identity is built on the words best or nothing, the pattern gets a lot harder to write off as bad luck. Now, if you've made it this far into the story, you clearly care about what's actually happening underneath the polished press releases in the car world, and that's exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. So do me a favor, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what you think is really going on at Mercedes right now, subscribe if you haven't already, and tap that notification bell so you don't miss the next deep dive. Because trust me, Mercedes is far from the only legendary brand quietly cracking under pressure right now. Okay, back to the story, because there's one more piece of this puzzle, and it ties everything together, and that right there is the real story behind the Mercedes disaster nobody saw coming. Not one dramatic collapse, but 5 separate cracks that all trace back to the same root cause. A legendary brand that leaned too hard on one market, hedged too late on electric vehicles, and let quality control slip while trying to fight fires everywhere else at once. If this story proves anything, it's that even the companies that quite literally invented the automobile aren't immune to the same forces reshaping the entire industry right now. Reputation built over a century can still get shaken in the span of about 18 months if the fundamentals underneath it start to crack. If you learned something new today, do me a favor and smash that like button. It genuinely helps get this video in front of more people who care about this stuff as much as you clearly do. And if you're not subscribed to MotorZen yet, now's the time, along with tapping that notification bell, because we're covering every major shakeup happening across the global auto industry right now, and I promise you, Mercedes is far from the last legacy brand we're going to dig into. Drop a comment down below, and let me know what you think. Is this a temporary rough patch Mercedes claws its way back from with these new model launches? Or is this the early sign of something much bigger unraveling across the entire German luxury car industry? I read every single comment, and honestly, some of the best video ideas on this channel have come straight from you guys. Thanks so much for watching. I'm genuinely grateful you spent this time with us, and I'll see you in the next one.